Here's Carl Benjamin to make goofy arguments against regarding trans women as women.
Real quick, just to be
Like,
clear, so the tweet that I saw from your account
yeah,
was if trans women were actually women, you wouldn't need to distinguish them with the term trans. So that was the
yeah,
quote that I was thinking of. Yeah. Okay. So
yeah.
Just like if apple trees were really trees, you wouldn't need to distinguish them with the word apple. If guard dogs were really dogs, you wouldn't have to distinguish them with the word guard. If atheist YouTubers were really YouTubers, you wouldn't have to distinguish them with the word atheist.
so like, what in particular are we talking about here? Like,
I think breeding is really what we're talking about. I think fundamentally, when you say trans women are women,
uh-huh.
at the end of the day, there's always going to be the necessary component that is childbirth and, like, reproduction, which is
No,
one of the. Oh, okay, hang on. Let's just, before we jump in, sort of thing. And
sure.
so I think that is fundamentally one of probably the main reason ultimately that anyone ever forms long-term relationships.
It's clearly absurd to say that children are the ultimate reason why anybody forms long-term relationships. This obviously isn't true of just anybody. What Sargon seems to have in mind more specifically is that having one's own biological children is the only reason for long-term relationships. Plenty of people form these relationships who don't want children at all, and plenty of the people who do form them for the purpose of raising children don't intend to raise their own biological children. And even if it were the only reason for long-term relationships, calling trans women women would not be a credible threat to such relationships.
At least in the overwhelming majority of cases, I think the expectation to breed is there.
I think Sargon and I would differ on what constitutes overwhelming. It certainly isn't so close to universal that recognizing that trans women are women causes greater harm than denying that they are women.
Have you had this conversation with other people before?
Well,
There's
lots
no
of
way
people,
you're
lots of
not
times, right?
okay because you can't defend this argument. It's horrible. So what would you say to a woman that has her tubes tied that's not capable of having children? Is this no longer a woman, or what about a man that's had a vasectomy? Is he no
No,
longer a man?
I didn't say they were no longer a woman, but they no longer fulfill the sort of necessary biological imperative that the gender role of woman is designed to operate around.
Okay,
I'm not convinced that a reproductive role defines a gender, but even if it did, if we can still consider cisgender sterile women to be women, despite the fact that they can't perform that role, why can't we consider trans women to be women?
so let's say that the majority of people want to reproduce. How is it even relevant to this conversation?
Because we're talking about a social role. And the purpose of the social role of woman is to facilitate the ability to form a breeding pair with a man.
If that were the case, then it would be pointless to consider lesbians to be women. Even if fulfilling the social role of breeding with a man were a sufficient condition for womanhood, which I don't think it is, it clearly isn't a necessary condition. There are lots of women whom we still consider women who can't or won't reproduce. But we don't deny their status as women on that basis, so why ought it be the justification for denying the womanhood of trans women?
Because they're the two aspects of humanity that both need to be fertile in order to conceive and produce a child. This is what I mean when I say you can't separate the gender role from woman, the gender role of woman, from the biological essence of what it is to be a female. One was created by the other, but the formulation "trans women are women" suggests that the gender role of woman has created the biological reality of being female, which is not correct in my opinion.
No, it suggests that neither is essential to the other.
Okay, so let's just walk down the road. So do you think that let's say that women en masse said that they wanted to pursue like higher education and work opportunities more than they wanted to pursue having children? Do you think that they should have the right to do that, or should we culturally or via the state or whatever force them, compel them to have more children instead? Because that would be like
I don't think that's got anything to do with the transgender debate.
okay, well, you're speaking in terms of like biological prescriptivism right now. You're telling me that like the role of woman should be to have a child or for like childbirth.
I didn't say it should be anything. Society at large will decide in a very sort of holistic way what the role of woman should be. But I think that there's no getting around the fact that it was something created by society to account for the observable biological differences between men and women, and the biological reality that women have an imperative to breed and the mechanism by which to do so.
Given the diversity of how womanhood is defined from culture to culture, I don't believe that this is true. But even if it were true that this is the reason the concept of womanhood was invented, what harm is done by expanding that concept now?
Be created to justify that and to facilitate that.
Sure. Okay. So I'm not trying to misquote. I'm just trying to understand because a lot of the words you're using are really loaded. When you say women have an imperative to breed, what do you mean by that?
Human beings have a biological imperative to reproduce.
What do you mean by imperative? Like, are you saying that this is like just descriptively something we do, or are you saying that it's something that we should push towards?
It's something that they feel that they want to do.
Okay, so what does that have to do? If some people feel like they need to reproduce, which is fine, I'm okay with that. What does that have to do with the discussion about trans people?
Because we need a way of being able to actually do that.
But we still can do that. You can go and have a child with a woman that is capable of having a child.
Yeah, but you need to know what a woman is.
You need to know who has a functioning uterus. Knowing who is or is not a woman will not consistently tell you that, even if you don't consider trans women to be women.
No, you don't. You need to know if they're you do. You're
Of course you
laughing,
do.
but you realize that there are women that you would call real women that can't have children, right? Do you acknowledge
Yes,
that?
I know.
Okay, so
Yes, of
knowing
course.
whether or not somebody is a woman under whatever arbitrary Sargon definition of woman there is, knowing that somebody
It's
is
not my definition.
well, it is your definition. Trust me.
Well, adult human female. It's just the dictionary definition. It's the
No.
the common definition society at large uses.
Sure. So
I haven't
common
innovated the definition of woman.
So common definition versus actual scientific definition versus kind of like the categorical definition. These are all like things that can be heavily contested. But in what you would
Sure.
call a woman, there are things that fit under that category that are not
Yeah.
capable of having children. So why would it be so
Yeah.
bad to include trans women under that?
I didn't say it would be bad.
Wait, so then what's the problem? Then what do we disagree with?
Well, the problem is the essential attack on the social construct that is a woman. Because the thing is, saying trans women are women is a statement that will necessarily lead to circumstances where a part of the gender role that is woman will not be fulfilled. And so the person who was engaging with the trans woman, expecting that aspect of the gender role to be fulfilled, will find themselves necessarily not only disappointed, but I guess deceived.
The scenario that Sargon seems to be painting here is of a guy who meets a lady, involves himself in a long-term relationship with her in the hope of impregnating her, and being disappointed that he spent the time he did with her if he finds out that she is trans and therefore incapable of getting pregnant. But if this were a reason not to consider trans women to be women, then it would be a reason not to consider voluntarily sterile cisgender women to be women, because they could also neglect to divulge their sterility.
In a way.
Wait,
And-
this is simply solved with a single question. When you're having a conversation with somebody and you bring up children, you say, I would like to have children, and the other person says, I can't have children. How does that conversation damage the role of women or the social category of woman in the West?
Because of the way it's approached and the things that will happen. I mean, you could easily describe it as transphobic to ask a person who you think is trans if they can have children.
Nobody in any part of the serious world would say that, aside from four follower
Well, there are
people.
lots of places in the unserious world
So
where they'll say that.
yeah, because on four follower accounts on Twitter, you can find any stupid opinion. But like actual
Oh,
people,
you can find this in
actual
people who are quite.
I would love to see any source ever.
This is the opinion of the police in Great Britain, you know.
How many people have been arrested by the police in Great Britain for asking their girlfriends about their plans to have children?
Well,
I mean, it really
like
depends
every
what it is,
definition, every category that we've created is a socially constructed category that we create to serve human happiness. So why wouldn't we
Sure.
redefine it? The category of man
Because-
and woman are socially defined categories. We could change it if we want to make more people happy. Why wouldn't we?
Well, by that reasoning, why define anything?
Because I just said because we get some utility out of it.
I don't think you get utility out of words that don't have solid definitions. I think the word becomes useless.
I never said we couldn't have solid definitions.
All definitions are in some degree of flux. Changing them arbitrarily would compromise their utility, but changing to serve a specific use increases their utility. This is a silly, slippery slope argument. Yes, you can change words to mean anything you like, but that doesn't mean that people will change them randomly.
You just did. If we
No,
can't
I said we
say-
could change the definition.
Yeah, but if we're changing the definition to mean something that is not within what we consider the definition useful to be defining.
Defining manhood or womanhood according to reproductive capacity is less useful than defining it in a way that encapsulates the far more complex and subtle ways in which our culture uses gender. The idea that someone is not a man or is less of a man if he's sterile clearly oversimplifies the concept in a way that makes it less useful. We clearly have broader ideas of manhood than that, and those ideas aren't served by such a restrictive definition.
Then you're not really. I mean, if if the term woman can be used to define someone that is biologically male, then it's no longer an adult human female.
First of all, the term woman, under your definition, probably already does define some people that are biologically male, and you don't even realize it. Firstly. Secondly, when we use...
How would that be the case?
Because I guarantee you that I could show you pictures of XY chromosome women that have... there's a name for the condition, but it basically you have extreme androgen insensitivity, and you can grow up your whole life and completely look like a woman, 100%, and you would look at her and you would say, well, let me see her vagina. Oh, she has one. That's a real woman. And then you would look at the genes and you would say, oh shit, they have XY chromosomes, and you would have no idea what to say, right? So this idea that there's some hardcore...
Okay, so that's an abnormality, right?
Abnormality is simply a pejorative way of saying rarity. Folks who bring this up when defending rigid concepts of gender seem to think that if something is rare, it therefore doesn't count as a counterexample. This is an arbitrary ad hoc dismissal.
It's absolutely something that exists, though. What I'm saying is
but that's a genetic abnormality, isn't it?
What does that have to do with my argument?
Well, what your argument is, what I would argue is that if we're going to define things, then we're not going to be defining them to satisfy the abnormal fringe cases. We're going to be defining them to satisfy the vast majority of cases in which they'll be useful.
Even if you restrict useful to mean useful for the purpose of knowing who has a functioning uterus, then the category of woman can include those with androgen insensitivity syndrome and trans women, and it will still be useful for that purpose in the vast majority of cases. I don't think that having a functioning uterus should be a defining characteristic of womanhood, but even if it were one, trans women make up such a small percentage of the population that you can include them in the definition of woman, and it will still work to predict such a feature the vast majority of the time. Referring to trans women as being women would not pose any credible threat to human reproduction or even the ease with which it is conducted.
Okay, and that's when you say going to be most useful.
Sure. Right? So would you agree that we make definitions in society for them to be useful?
Yes, I think
when you say we make a definition to be useful, what do you mean by useful? What do you mean by that?
To be used and facilitate whatever interactions that need to be facilitated.
Cool.
By presumably the largest number of people.
Awesome. I agree with that. So we create definitions in society and we organize categories because they're useful to people insofar as that they serve some need to make most of us happy. If we can expand the category of woman to include trans woman, I don't see what the problem is for that.
Because it's not accurate.
It would be accurate if we changed the definition. It makes no sense to dismiss a proposed new definition on the basis that it's not accurate according to the old definition. That's silly.
I mean, like these definitions, this is what I'm trying to say.
Wait, can we do this word by word? Let's do this word by word. When you say not accurate...
Listen. The concept of woman is not a transcendental concept. It is biologically essential.
No, it's not. Wait, what?
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Show me where.
Well, I disagree.
Well, no, you can't disagree. You're just wrong. There's nowhere in.
No, I can disagree, and I don't think that you're correct.
It doesn't matter what you think here.
Well, if a woman in standard usage of English or just any language, which going back into the midst of time has been adult human female, then that is a biologically essentialist word.
Even if the word were biologically essential at some point in time according to some cultures, which is debatable, enough people today use the concept of woman to mean something far more complex and subtle that the supposedly traditional definition is not the only legitimate one. When a trans woman says she is a woman, she's not referring to her chromosomes or her anatomy or her reproductive role or capacity. She's using a non-biological yet nonetheless legitimate definition.
That's the purpose of it. It's designed to reflect a physical, biological reality.
There you go.
Even if it was, that's not the only legitimate use today.
It is. So we have categories that we've created because we believe that they reflect some underlying physical reality. The concept of female, that isn't a real thing. That's not something that exists in nature. Yes.
Really?
Yes.
I don't agree with you.
Okay. If we eliminate all human beings, where do you find the concept of female?
in the animal world, I
No,
suppose.
you
But
don't. You can find some
why don't
things
you?
because what you have is you have some things that have collections of certain features, and if we want, we can label
Yeah.
them in certain ways, right? And that's
Yeah.
what we do as people. We label things because we
Yeah.
get some value out of it. We have people that
Yeah.
generally have vaginas, can give birth to people. We've got people that generally have dicks, that
Yeah.
people, right? We call some of
Yeah,
these
males and
female.
females.
Yeah, we call some of these females, we call some of these males. But there is nothing in
Yeah.
science that says we must have this category female, or we must have this category male, or that we must
No,
define
it's
them in any particular
philosophy
way.
that we need to think about there. Science can only tell us data. We need to be able to interpret that, and for that we need philosophy.
Exactly.
That's precisely why these categories are philosophical ones rather than strictly biological ones.
I do believe that this is very biologically essentialist, and I think that trying to separate that is ridiculous. Because I mean, as soon as you separate, if you say that gender is transcendental, okay, why did we create it in the first place?
Because we have some utility out of it. It's essential to recognize that every category that we construct as humans, we do so
But
because
that's a biological essentialist argument.
It's only biologically essentialist if the only utility is a biological utility. But the utility of regarding a trans woman to be a woman is not strictly biological. It's much more social and cultural than it is biological.
no, it's
If
not.
it's
My
essential,
argument is not
what's
biological.
it categorizing?
What?
What's it categorizing?
What is it categorizing? We taking a description of some things that we hope are representative of some underlying traits, and we're assigning them, we're ascribing them to certain categories.
Biological traits, right?
Yes.
So
Biological essentialism, your naturalist argument, implies that because something exists in a certain way in nature, we ought to recognize that difference. But this is not how we construct categories in real life. For instance, there's a million.
no,
different...
I don't agree. I think that is in fact how we construct categories in real life.
Then
And
why
I
don't we
think what you're
categorize people
doing-
by the number of moles on their body? We
well,
could
I
do
would
that.
imagine that utility is something that we would apply here.
Okay, so what you just did is instead of you avoided the science and you said, well, hold on, I'm going to appeal to utility. That's my argument. What I'm telling you is that every time we construct a category, we're appealing to the utility of the category, not some scientific or biological realism or constructivism. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
I agree, but the category itself is a biological category.
No, there's no such thing as a biological category. Categories don't
Of
exist
course there
biologically.
is.
No, there's not.
Categories are all invented for our purposes. They are not discovered. For example, we separate animals into vertebrates and invertebrates because it's useful to do so, not merely because it is an objective empirical fact that some animals have vertebrae and some don't. It is just as much an objective empirical fact that some animals weigh under 50 kilograms and the rest weigh 50 kilograms or more, yet we don't consider those to be categories because such a distinction isn't useful enough to be worth regarding as categorical.
I can't.
We choose to. Look,
Yeah, we do. No. Wait, listen. What you just said.
fundamentally misunderstanding what
No,
I'm saying.
what you just said betrayed your
You-
argument.
no, I promise you absolutely are. Right?
You just said that we choose to. The fact that we make that choice,
Yes.
that choice is a normative choice. We're doing something out of a
Yes,
moral
well done.
compulsion. It's a normative choice.
No, it's not even moral. I mean, it probably is both moral.
No,
but
it
there
is.
is also a practical necessity.
Practical necessity is also a moral issue, Sargon.
No, the necessity.
Of course there is.
Just because we make a choice to organize things in a certain way doesn't mean that choice is necessarily backed by reality, and that reality tells us we have to make that choice. So, for instance, I could have 100 people, and I could separate them based on height. I could separate them based on gender. I could separate them based on eye color. I could separate a million different traits. But nothing in science is going to tell me what I should separate them on. I have to make that
Yeah,
normative
I
choice.
don't care about the science of it, really. It doesn't really matter about the science of it because it comes down to the interpretation of it. And at the end of the day, there is no questioning the biological reality that male and female as distinct sexes do exist.
So you don't care about the science of it, but you do care about the biology of it? Is biology not a science? And is it a matter of interpretation, or is there no denying the biological reality? Those are contradictory statements. If there's no denying the biological reality, then it isn't up to our interpretation.
Even
Yes.
if humans went around to categorize them, the animals themselves would categorize themselves in that way.
But there's
They
also
don't even need a language to do this.
But-
This is such a primal thing. It's done by pheromones, man. Right?
we
And
could
so
also
it's
categorize people based on the number of bruises they have, based on the color of
Yeah,
their
yeah, we
hair.
could, but that'd be stupid, and only an idiot would suggest it.
Your
right?
language is so
So-
loaded. How can you not understand this?
It would be stupid because it wouldn't be useful. It wouldn't be any less of a biological reality, though. It would be every bit as objective and empirically demonstrable as categorizing people by any other physical trait. Those traits are just as much undeniable biological traits as any other. The mere fact that a trait is undeniable or biological doesn't mean it has to be the basis of a category.
You just said it would be
I don't
stupid.
care.
You're
What I'm
begging the
saying is
question.
reflective of reality. But if you want to argue that trying to reflect reality is loaded, okay. I don't
No,
care.
what-
right?
no,
What I'm
you're
saying
so-
is disprove what I'm saying, and you can't.
Why would categorizing people by their hair color or height not reflect reality? Are those things not real?
No,
Because I'm
how?
describing reality and
no,
you're
no.
not.
You are literally disproving your own statements with every sentence you speak, and you don't realize it. When you're
Go on,
saying,
then.
you keep saying that your reality is, I'm choosing the reality. The choices that you make are arbitrary and unjustified. That you're not.
These aren't choices that I made, and they're not arbitrary, and they are
yes,
just
you're missing a deeper level. Okay, what you're saying is that male
deep
and
level. You're going.
your male and female refer to some underlying physical property. I don't disagree with that, of course.
Yes.
However,
Okay.
I could design a million categories that could refer to any number of
You
underlying
could.
properties. Now, whether or not
You
we
could.
choose to use male and female, or whether or not we choose to use redhead or brunette, that's an arbitrary choice. We don't find the answer on what we should categorize.
That's
things
not
as.
true. That I don't agree that that's arbitrary. I think that there are physical imperatives that make us choose these things because of frankly, the path of least resistance.
If we are made to choose these things, then it would be impossible to choose to use the word woman to refer to a trans woman. Yet lots of people do make that choice all the time.
Okay, can you tell me then, why ought we value the category of male and female?
Because there is a distinct connection with the social category of man and woman to male and female.
But only if we define them as having such a connection. Again, Sargon is rejecting a proposed definition on the basis that it doesn't match the traditional definition.
Okay,
These are things that we use in our social lives.
Okay, so you're describing things to me. You're giving me descriptive claims. What I'm asking you is, why ought we value male and female? Don't tell me that we do. I'm asking you, why should we? Why ought we value the category of male and female?
We are social animals and we need to interact with one another, and we have inherited a very effective way of doing this, especially considering it's such a complicated issue. And this is something that it's been gifted to us from the millions of previous generations who had to struggle with the same things, and they came up with a fairly workable system that works for something like, what was it, 99.3% of people or something. So that's pretty good, really.
And if we switched to a set of definitions that worked for 100% of people, it would be even better, wouldn't it?
Okay, why ought we value that, though?
Because it's working.
Why ought we value something that works for 99.3% of the population over a more expansive definition that would work for 100% of the population?
Because it makes them misrepresentative of the thing that they are. Like, an adult human female is someone we can biologically identify, and you want to include that, to expand that to include the category of adult human male? And that's ridiculous.
Okay,
then the
like, can you
definition
give me...
disappears.
No, it doesn't disappear. I don't know why
Yes,
you
it
think
does.
that just because you expand a definition, all of a sudden it becomes worthless. But let's say
Because
that's true.
Man and woman are dichotomized.
First of all, they're not a dichotomy.
Either a man or a woman.
No. First of all, it's
and
not.
if you expand it to include both, then they
This is an anti-science argument. So if you want to say that, that's fine. But the distribution between male and female is
We're not talking
bimodal.
about science.
It's not binary. It is bimodal. There's a ton of overlap between what is male and what is female. Okay?
I appreciate that, but we're not talking about science. We're talking about sociology.
If you're talking about sociology, then why do you keep bringing up undeniable biological reality?
Yeah, sure. I'm just curious. Do you consider somebody like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, are these SJWs to you, or?
Not to me personally, but that's because I agree with their philosophy.
Okay, so you've literally defined SJW as somebody you disagree with. Like, is that really the definition? That's what you just said.
Yeah, kind of. I think everyone has, like, someone is an SJW to someone else, you know?
So Sargon's literal position is everyone I disagree with is an SJW.
So I still don't see the harm. We were talking about parents. I don't see the harm in saying trans women are women or trans men can be men. Like, I don't see the harm in that. I don't see where this damage to society comes in here.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. It's like, I think the problem is you can't really make people believe it.
Yeah, you can. Of course you can. You do it with cultural pressure.
I mean, sorry. Okay, I mean, you can certainly make people say that they believe it.
Make people believe what? Proposing a new definition is not to make a claim about the thing being redefined, but rather to declare what one means. When I say trans women are women, I'm not making a claim about trans women or women in general. I'm explaining, in part, what I mean by the terms women and trans women. To say you don't believe me when I say trans women are women is essentially to say that you don't believe that I'm really using those words in the way I say I am, which is absurd. This is like saying I don't believe that Pluto isn't a planet. If you don't believe that, then you don't understand what astronomers mean when they say that Pluto is not a planet.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's tyranny.
It's
What happens to freedom of conscience?
There is no. I mean,
There is no freedom of conscience.
well,
Jesus. Okay.
it depends on what you mean by the word freedom. But I mean, like you didn't freely choose to
Well,
speak English, did you? No, you were born with that
no, that's
language, right?
true.
So, so,
That's true. Yeah.
so I mean, like socially, I mean, we have all sorts
Yeah.
of pressures around us, and we can kind of dictate the pressures.
But I think that if I don't believe that a man is a woman, I should be free to voice that concern.
Well, I mean, we could have to go really far back. I would argue no.
Can't do that in New York, though.
Not if you're an employer or a building owner, because we have laws
Mm.
against discrimination against protected classes. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's laws against thought crimes.
No, laws against
That's
discrimination.
what it is.
If you are intentionally calling a trans woman a man, you are doing more than just thinking. You don't have to believe that trans women are women. You don't even need to refrain from saying that you don't believe that in most circumstances. You just aren't allowed to harass trans women by calling them men if they are your employees or customers. Such a law doesn't prevent you from thinking any differently or saying that that's what you think, as long as you don't do it at your place of business.
No, it's laws against discrimination
No,
and protected.
it's misgendering someone.
No,
But
it
gender
is.
isn't just a.
So it's intentionally misgendering someone in a discriminatory way if you're a building owner or an employer.
Yeah, but if I don't agree that trans women are women, I'm not misgendering them, in my opinion.
Oh, that's fine. Then you just aren't allowed to own a business and you can go fuck off. I mean, I'm okay with that.
Wow.
Much
So
the same
tyranny.
way. Well, sure.
Tyranny in favor of transgenderism.
If you argue that tyranny is protecting the rights of some people, then sure. I mean, anything can be
That's
tyranny.
I don't agree that you have a right to have me call a man or.
The law does not force you to call trans women women. It simply forbids you from calling a trans woman a man, and even then, only if she is your tenant, customer, or employee. It's like Bill C-16 in Canada. Jordan Peterson thinks it forces people to use certain pronouns that they don't want to use. No, it doesn't. It doesn't say anything about pronouns, and at most it would only make it a crime to use the pronouns you know a person does not want you to use. It wouldn't force you to use the pronouns they want you to use. If you don't want to use the pronouns they ask you to use, just don't use third-person pronouns to refer to them at all. Just use their name. Also notice that Sargon's goalpost has moved from calling trans women women will make it harder to reproduce to calling trans women women will lead to me not being allowed to call them men, which is more important to him than respecting their gender identity for some reason.
So anyway,
Okay, just to be clear, what
the construct has a descriptive element that is expressly to do with the biology of the person we're describing.
It's only expressly to do with the biology of the person they're describing if that's what the speaker intends to express with those words. The speaker need not intend to express that. When trans women say they're women, they are not talking about their biology. They're talking about their subjective self-concept.
What exactly is it that you think? Do you honestly think that there can be no? It's no problem, and there is no connection to the biology of a male or female that the gender roles have. Is that what you think?
Many cultures connect gender roles with the roles a person can play in reproduction, but the issue is whether it needs to be that way. I don't see what harm comes from regarding someone who can't inseminate anyone to be a man, or regarding someone who can't gestate a fetus to be a woman. We already regard cisgender and fertile women to be women, so the fact that trans women can't gestate a fetus would be a very inconsistent reason not to regard them as women.
What you've done is change the definition so radically as to include its antonym. So I don't know why I would agree to that.
Why would changing a definition to include something that was an antonym to the original definition necessarily be a bad thing to do? If it's more useful to include a concept that was an antonym to the original definition, what's the problem?
I think that there definitely can be demonstrable harm, like from a society that is openly transphobic. But the problem is I don't agree that transphobia is not agreeing to linguistic changes of the fundamental sort of building blocks of our society. Because whether you like it or not, language really does affect everything we do. And the thing that the transgender activists are attacking is literally the foundation of all of civilization.
If defining womanhood by the ability to gestate a fetus were the foundation of all civilization, there could never be any civilizations that have defined woman in a way that isn't completely dependent on the ability to bear a child, but our own civilization does that. Our civilization does not hold fertility to be a necessary condition for being any gender. Also, to say that it's foundational to civilization implies that all of civilization could collapse if we define trans women as women. You're gonna have to connect the dots for me on that one. How exactly would that happen?
When you disconnect the concept of male and female, man and woman, sorry, from the biological reality of male and female, then you are acting as if these social constructs are transcendental. And to say that they are transcendental means that they can be replaced at any time for any reason, because there's no particular reason that they're in their place now.
And if we did that, what problem would that create? What if we just abandoned the concept of man and woman altogether, and instead, when we wanted to reproduce, we just identified people as either inseminators or gestators, or neither, as the case may be? The only problem I could see with that is that those of us who want to identify as a gender wouldn't be able to identify as the gender with which we want to identify. What Sargon seems to have in mind is that the other problem is that people would not be able to label other people as being the gender they want to label them. It seems to me to be pretty absurd to think of that as a problem.
I mean, that's
And
true.
once you
They
start
can be
doing
replaced.
that,
They're not biologically
I don't
essential.
agree. Well, I mean, it's a different. Again, it's a huge conversation.
Well, but
But
it's kind of the center point to our conversation. If you think that like male and female are
okay,
like,
can you name a society that doesn't have male and female?
yeah,
A
I know
minimalist.
that like there was like a, I want to say in older India, didn't they have 3 genders? I'm not as well read on history. I'm really bad about it. But
Yeah,
like,
no, I know what you mean. There is what is considered to be a third gender in like some Indian culture somewhere, right?
okay,
But that's obviously an outlier. That's obviously not represent. I mean,
okay,
like
sure.
even tribes
But
in
like
the Amazon have
this,
women.
So what if it's an outlier? If an outlier can do it, then it's not impossible. Democracies were outliers for a long time. Cultures that practice agriculture were outliers at one point. The fact that something is practiced only by outliers is not a reason to dismiss it as though it doesn't count.
this appeal to history to try to talk about like prescriptive behaviors for society is not interesting to me, because it's not how I think about any of my moral statements. Like if I were to think, if somebody were to come to me like, hey, do you think that like how should we treat animals, or how should we treat some group of people? Like my go-to is
I
never
see
like,
what
well,
you're
in
at. I see
history,
what
like
you're
how do they do it? Like that's not
No,
I don't think
it's,
yeah.
I'm not really appealing to history. What I'm trying to point out is that the sexual differences between male and female is part of the human condition,
Okay.
and it ends up evolving out of it gender roles of man and woman, and these differ between cultures, obviously,
Okay.
but they're always distinct. And they're distinct for a reason.
They are, in fact, not always distinct. They're not distinct among cultures who recognize the Hijra or two-spirited people or any other gender category that doesn't fit into a strictly biologically defined dichotomy.
For me personally, okay, I prefer to date people with vaginas. That's my personal sexual preference. If I expand the definition of women to include trans women, right? That doesn't bother me much, right? If I find out what somebody's genitals are, whatever, that's fine. It's no skin off my back. It doesn't harm me at all. If this creates a measurably massive positive impact, though, for people that do identify that way, then yeah, sure, that's really easy for me to do. It's not bothering me. It's no skin off my back. It's not destroying society.
And for you, that's fine. But for someone else, that might not be fine, and you have no authority with which to impose it on them. And that's why when the state does impose it on them, it's tyrannical.
I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on whether the state fining someone for deliberately calling a trans woman employee a man is tyrannical. I'm never going to be able to have more sympathy with someone who is angry that they can't call a trans woman a man than with a trans woman who is angry because she was called a man. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.